we are going to be now doing a panel about how monetization can actually make your game more fun. So I'm going to invite all of our different panelists to join me. We've got, well, first up, we've got Cael from Unity joining us. We've got, there's Jan from GamesGroup. Hey, we've got...
Hello.
Hey, two of you here at the moment. Oh, and we've got someone out. We've got Zaair from FRAG Games, and I think we're just waiting for Cyril from AppLovin, and then we'll get started. But how are you all? You all doing okay at the moment?
Too bad, thanks. Not too bad.
Yeah. How are things in all your different parts of the world, wherever you might be at the moment?
We pushed our luck. We got lucky for a long time, and then we pushed our luck. I think that's happening in a few different places in the world. So back inside for us.
I feel better here in Munich. So
yeah,
the situation is getting better here. So
yeah,
hopefully it will stay this way.
And London's a bit of a mess, but the sun's been nice, I guess. It's been warm.
It's not, well, I'm up north in Liverpool, but it's not great today, but it's, it's all right. It's all right. Hi, Cyril. We've got you as well here now.
Hi guys, hi everyone. Thanks
Hi. No, thank you for being here. Obviously, we're looking forward to this panel, which I will personally be leading, which is quite nice for me. It means I get to join in as well, rather than being in the background. And
Wonderful.
We'll start diving in properly in a minute. But as we always do with every sort of panel, why don't you all introduce yourselves? Tell us a bit about what you do and what your role is. And we'll start with Cael. Do you want to let us know a bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Cathal. I've worked at Unity for the past 2 years. Previous to that, I worked in a research company in gaming, and I ran a startup in Ireland for about 3-4 years in gaming as well. And yeah, excited to be here. Cheers.
Thanks. And Jan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the product manager at GamesGroup. That's my 3rd year as a product manager in that position here. Previously worked at different free-to-play projects. So yeah.
Yeah,
pleasure to be here.
No, a pleasure to have you. And Zaair?
My name is Zaair Hussain. I'm the business director of FRAG Games. We've been an external development studio mostly, with some of our own stuff for the last 7 years. I tend to work with a lot of different clients, and therefore tend to see and read about and learn about a lot of different monetization techniques. So I was looking forward to this.
And Cyril?
Sure. Thanks for having me first. So I'm Cyril, senior manager of BD at AppLovin. I joined the company like 3 years ago, and now I'm leading the team responsible for growing hyper-casual, casual publisher businesses, mostly across Western European markets, including like France, Turkey, which are almost some of the biggest studios out there.
Fantastic. And then just before we start, I wanted to say to everyone, because I forgot to say it at the top, please do throw any questions you've got into the Q&A and get yourself involved in the chat, because after I've gone through some of the topics that, I feel are important to discuss, we'll open the floor up to some questions. And just to quickly say to Dan in the chat, to anyone who's missed any of our earlier talks or, maybe, jumps into this talk later or anything, all of our talks will be available in the coming weeks on platforms such as YouTube, and we'll be sending out links as well. So don't worry about any of that. But in the meantime, let's get to our first question, which I've got in front of me. So I wanted to start sort of quite broadly and with a topic that maybe a lot of people are aware of. And that's, in some respects, the fact that that word monetization can sometimes have a negative sort of connotation with people when it doesn't necessarily have to. So, yeah, there are many different forms of monetizing your game. However, many talk about this in a negative light compared to a premium model. So many people will be like, oh, I don't like in-app purchases. I don't like in-app ads. I just like premium. But, do you think that monetization is fundamentally a barrier to enjoyment, both either whether it's mobile or whether it's PC and, different areas? Let's get that out of the way, the bogeyman.
I think it's just been, a lot of people have abused monetization, right? In which I think you were saying you were interested in psychology and student of psychology and all of that. They've abused Skinner box techniques for the last several years because that's been the easy way to do it. But that doesn't mean inherently there's anything wrong with it, just like inherently there's nothing wrong with premium games, right? So there's a lot of ways to do it which aren't as grindy, they're not trying to take the player for a ride, right? And I think we are now coming back to that end where the really abusive practices have been rejected now by consumers who've become more and more sophisticated about these things. And people have found new, like less intrusive ways, like more enjoyable ways to monetize their games.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any input on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe if I can jump in. So
Yeah.
on the previous talk, Diego mentioned, about the balance between the more monetization focused techniques and actually more user experience focused techniques. And I think we are observing this shift in powers right now as we speak, especially based on the old monetization models, which were, gacha and more casino-like systems, towards more user experience, gameplay augmented mechanics, which actually can bring a lot of value to the gameplay itself as well, which hopefully you can explore later.
Yeah, definitely. Cyril, Cael, anything to add on this area?
You go first, Cyril.
Sure. So I think if we take a step back, like the main statement would be that game developers are kind of responsible for providing the value proposition behind why players actually download and play games in the first place. So if we look back at the PC era, people were just like going to the store and buy a game, right? This is a pretty high sell to a player. Now, from a mobile developer perspective, the barrier to enter the gaming market has become considerably lower than before. And it's great because it encourages like creativity. So we want to ensure that this barrier remains as low as possible. And to touch on what Jan and Zaair just said, we need to find, developers need to find the right balance between in-app purchases, in-app advertising, and even like the premium games, trying to find the right price the user is ready to pay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that in general, monetization is really designed to, guide the player through the game and sometimes stop the player when burnout could be a problem. And bad implementation of monetization is clear cut and obvious, and it is a barrier to enjoyment. But bad implementation of no ad strategy or bad implementation of monetization strategy is equally a barrier to enjoyment. And I think that's very important because we see it happen all the time, particularly with more veteran developers or traditionally PC or console. They build the game as if they want to see them play it, which is usually wrong. And game developers need to actually realize who their users are and understand the player personas in more detail. And then they can understand what is actually making the game fun and how can monetization improve that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so, keeping on that thread of, player enjoyment through the monetization, before we delve even deeper, do you think there's any specific forms of monetization that hold the least friction to the player and sort of keep them within the experience and, in a better method?
I think it depends on the experience, right? Like it depends, and as I was saying, like it also depends on the player persona. I think like with CCGs and things like that, collectibles, that's like buying packs of cards since well before it was digital. That's part of the experience, right? Like that adds to the experience. If you made it like in Hearthstone or whatever, if you just made, let's say, cards free to buy, I think like 70% of people would lose interest in that game overnight, right? Like that is an example of monetization flowing with the experience rather than keeping you from the experience.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more with that sentiment, especially when it comes to CCGs. They're it's kind of an integral part of the experience. Mm-hmm. But does anyone else have any input on, if there's any specific forms of monetization that, prevent friction between player and the game whilst still being able to monetize the experience?
Yeah, I guess just to shout the obvious, rewarded video integration is something that, of course, is going to be the least amount of friction. And really, what people need to kind of add here is that rewarded video integration is all about where the person is excited to see the rewarded video. It's absolutely key that the person is coming back to the game to click that rewarded video because it produces that serotonin and increases that excitement. When you're just labeling on a random placement at some point in the game where we see it happen so often, that's causing the friction. But a good rewarded video implementation that supports various players is definitely the least amount of friction, for sure.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you were thinking about this game when you said it, but if you guys have played Archero.
Yeah, I play it all the time.
Right. I hit a couple of paywalls eventually, and I gave in a couple of times, but I got pretty far in it. And the thing about the ads there is interesting what you're saying. It's not like I looked forward to the ads themselves necessarily, even though some of them were quite fun. It was that Archero is just perfectly, the flow of the game is balanced to support it. So you've just had this really intense session where you've either beat a boss over a couple of minutes, or you've beaten various waves of enemies, and your adrenaline is pumping. And the ad is kind of like this way to be like, huh. And you just sort of, it's just a very calming thing, because you have 40 seconds in which you're still earning something, right? You're getting some reward, or you're doubling a reward that you just worked for by taking down a boss or something like that. So while I wouldn't say the ad necessarily produced serotonin in me, it was a chance for a breather. And the reason I noticed how well it was done is because I played another game, which I'm forgetting the name of, which also had reward ad monetization, but because their play sessions were so short, it felt like 10 seconds of game followed by 30 seconds of ad followed by 10 seconds of game. And the ratio was just completely off. And it kind of it made me appreciate how well Archero was balanced that way.
Yeah. So Jan, Cyril, do you want to?
Yeah, so to what just Zaair touched on, I think it really depends on the game itself, right? So interstitials remain, I think, the biggest ad format out there when it comes to in-app advertising, right? So this is probably the format that feels the most intrusive because it's unsolicited, sometimes not skippable, which is not great usually, but yet it's the most used by developers, especially in the hyper-casual era, so to say. So it's crucial at this time to find the right pacing by keeping an eye on all the different KPIs in game, such as ARPDAU, game sessions length, retention, and so on. So it's all about balancing. And same goes with banners, which actually are becoming widespread as well, especially with hyper-casual again. It's oftentimes frowned upon, but it's usually a nice addition in terms of revenue without hurting the retention significantly. So yeah, among interstitials, rewarded videos, banners, when it comes to in-app advertising, there's a lot of work to be done by the game developer to make sure that the user doesn't have any friction with the gameplay itself, doesn't experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Maybe to wrap it up as well, because so far we focus mostly on advertising, but it really comes down to the positive reinforcement, as mentioned before throughout the talk. I think interestingly enough, this can also be done through in-app purchases. One of the very good examples of that would be the battle passes so far, where you already have a progression and you augment the gameplay by adding a layer which is monetized. But you also give players an option to unlock the free content. And anyway, they progress, they unlock something, and on top of that, they receive extra value, which creates that loop of positivity and as mentioned before, serotonin. That's something which a lot of developers should aim for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jan there, because Battle Pass is the other thing that, Archero did this really well. There's obviously Fortnite and a bunch of seasonal passes. And you don't feel taken advantage of, because you know exactly what you're getting on the free track and you know exactly what you're getting on the premium track. In fact, I would say this is a way kind of free-to-play games are kind of edging into the hybrid premium model, right? I don't know if that's a term or I just made it up, but the idea that here's what you can do for free, and here is exactly, it's not a box, it's not a mystery, here is exactly what you will get if you pay this month. And I mean, I think that's very fair, and I don't think anyone feels taken advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on from that, we talked a little bit about what we have, but monetization is an area that's constantly evolving. And, in that sense, do you think this evolution in monetization offers developers a chance to, explore and evolve how they approach their game development? For example, giving them better data to work with, or other and different new opportunities that impact both their monetization and how they approach game development as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think people vote with their wallets, right? So if what they're voting, and I think you need to pay careful attention to that, because if what they're voting for is I want to skip this grind, what they're basically saying is you've made a game that basically gets in its own way. and like your timers are way too long and it takes forever to do anything, and it's just like they're trying to skip huge parts of your game. On the other hand, if they're spending on things like cosmetics, that tells you something again. It means they're happy with the game, they want more options. I think it can prove a lot of data, and it can prove it a lot better than a poll would, because they have to put something behind it.
Yeah, Cathal, I know you were about to say something as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in general these days, the use of live ops is now cheaper, better integrated, and just more easily managed. So developers can use this data to really maximize the ad revenue without impacting the experience. And it comes down to the actual game strategy itself. Like, for example, in the US, you've got the average ads is about 3.5 per session, while in the likes of Korea, it's about 4.8. So monetization managers can then segment and focus on different regions to maximize the users in those regions without causing any effect. And I often see that people are using just global strategies when the data is there in front of them. Like another example would be with role-playing games. About 1.5% of those would be payers to non-payers, while the likes of racing, it's only about 0.5% are payers to non-payers. And so people are actually, they're building games just because they like them, but not realizing what kind of data is there, and they're not using that data to strategically design their monetization kind of target.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did Jan or Cyril, did you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, of course. So to what Cael just said, basically, there's no one-size-fits-all method, right? So in some countries, the user engagement with ads will be higher than others. In some genres, it will be different as well. For example, if we take the art show example, I'm pretty sure a lot of developers have tried to replicate that, but without any success, right? The best successes we've seen from our partners and from the entire industry usually offer unique user journeys, so to say. So how can we improve the experience for the user? So this is where user segmentation kicks in. So going a little bit deeper in terms of looking at the data and so on. So there's a bunch of new tools that have emerged that gives developers better data to work with. Ultimately, it enables developers to improve the user immersion, right? So for example, in our experience with Max Mediation, the in-app bidding and impression or even user level revenue data gives accurate and real-time data to game developers that they can then leverage to segment their users and improve the game overall. So for example, a user that would be very engaged with ads and so on, the game developer will make sure that it keeps catering for that, as opposed to users that just don't engage at all with any ads. Then at some point, maybe the game developer will want to show less ads to this very user. So yeah, there's a lot of work that can be done by game developers to make that user experience pretty unique.
Yeah. And Jan?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just to reiterate what Cyril said. So that's very good KPI, basically. It's also very instant in comparison to other metrics such as retention or session length, which often require behavioral changes within your player base. With revenue, with ad revenue, IAP revenues, you can usually very quickly evaluate the value of the updates, the value of the feature changes. And that's something which a lot of developers should be mindful of, that it's a very, very good tool and with rapid feedback.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll stay with you, Jan, as well. And keeping on this same topic before we move on to other topics, you know, monetization has become so intertwined with development, but do you see any new monetization models appearing or evolving out of those that already exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always a lot of interesting things happening in the markets, as namely, we are currently embracing pretty much games as a service, as a concept. And so are the players, funnily enough. A lot of players start thinking about games as actual social or entertainment platforms. So subscription models and recurring payments such as battle passes, which in the end are just a subscription with a different label very often. Those are two very interesting monetization methods. And then on top of that, of course, we also have in-game advertisements, which are also going into the direction of more immersive branded experiences. Namely, there's a few a few titles which are being worked on, and a few games that could, for instance, use in-game advertisement as real-world textures. Let's think Cyberpunk, if we think big, and then we have a Tesla ad somewhere in between. That's something which I think within the next coming years will be appearing more and more.
Yeah. Anyone else? Cyril, do you have anything to add on this sort of topic?
Not so much. I really basically agree with what Jan just said.
Yeah, I mean, is that the consensus across the panel, or is there anything else that sort of you think?
About, like, new sorts of monetization models. One that one that was really interesting to me is one that Miniclip uses a lot, and then Golf Clash uses, which is the wager system. And that also kind of goes back to what we were talking about for things which flow with the user experience, right? Like challenging someone to a game of bowling, tennis, whatever it is. That kind of appeals to a lot of the core gamers in us, right? Core gamers who may not have a lot of time. It's like, all right, we will wager, and eventually the game kind of takes a slice of that wager and then allows you to bet against one another. I think that system really enhances those games. It really enhances the competitive nature of those games, right? When people start playing each other, because they get enough virtual currency to start with, right? Like if you just want to play a few games a week or whatever, you're going to be able to do that, even if you lose all of them. And if you want more, and if you get serious enough about it, that rush of winning someone else's virtual coins, I think that goes a long way in enhancing the experience. So I've really been, it obviously only works for like these very short session PvP games. But for that, I think it works really well to enhance the experience.
Yeah. And Cael, did you have any thoughts on this, or is yours just a consensus with the panel?
Just very quickly, what I was going to say is that I think, as I mentioned, with live ops being more and more utilized, monetization managers are almost becoming game designers and product owners, and they're driving a lot of the game decisions. And I think that because of this, the use of hybrid monetization strategies, depending on various different cohorts of users, is something that's more applicable. Previously, that wasn't really able to be done. One monetization strategy, it's too time consuming to do more, but we see more and more that people are starting to do subscriptions in certain countries or do battle pass changes. It just depends totally. And I think that's important to notice, that you can use multiple monetization strategies depending. And that's where the evolution comes in.
Yeah, definitely. So, oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I find it very interesting what Cael just said, because the point that you said about ad monetization managers becoming like real product guys is a new trend we've been seeing also for the past couple of years now, if not like last year. So I think it's been enabled also by some new technologies we touched upon, such as like in-app bidding and so on, where a lot of like the tedious work to optimize waterfalls, to talk to ad networks and so on is now gone. And now the ad monetization manager can finally have some free time to focus primarily on more product-driven tasks, such as integrating better ad placements to increase the user engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sticking with you, Cyril. I'm moving on now into looking at in-app advertisements. You know, obviously, in-app advertisements hold no financial barrier to the player, but they can sometimes break up flow and immersion with experience, depending on how they're approached. So how do you first, but obviously the whole panel, think that developers can best utilize in-app advertisements while still keeping the player engaged?
Sure. So beyond the unique ad placements to be integrated and so on, I think Jan and Zaair will probably talk about that working for game studios. So there's one point I think that's really crucial, is to make sure that the app developer guarantees the user some kind of safe space, so to say, or just ads that he wants to be engaged with. So in our experience with SafeDK, for example, which is a solution that can monitor precisely the ads running on one's inventory, the developer has a role to keep his user engaged in a safe environment by allowing only legitimate creatives. So if you only show inappropriate creatives and so on to the user, then you might create frustration, then create complaints, and then your rating on the store would go down. So it's key, I think, to avoid any friction, to make sure that this environment remains safe.
Yeah. Anyone else? So let's move on to Jan. Did you have any input, like you say, as a dev?
Well, I mean, I can only agree also with Cyril and forth. To be honest, it really comes down to pre-planning. This is something which sounds obvious and very simple, but as far as I'm concerned, I've seen a lot of projects which basically didn't have that pre-planning implemented well before. A few of the examples also come from major players like Supercell, where Brawl Stars has implemented ads in the game, and subsequently they had to remove it just because of the required rebalancing of the economy. And it's not just Supercell, there's also ID Software with Quake Live, which was relying on branded content and in-game advertising, but they very quickly realized that because of the pace of the game, players don't really see the ads. So there was a fundamental issue with that. So my advice would be for any developer to really do the pre-planning and think where you want to put the ads and where you want to put the monetization within your game early on.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the design phase,
yeah.
right? Like when the GDD is coming out, that's when they should start with the monetization. And just like everything else in the GDD could change over the next 8 months, and everything about the monetization could change. But it's important to have those people involved from the beginning, right? Like that perspective, because when you try to tack it on, everyone can tell.
Yeah, and Cael, did you have anything to add? Obviously, back from the other side, like Cyril was saying.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. What I just wanted to say was that general ad usage and monetization usage is becoming more and more prevalent. I think it's like 26% of all mobile gamers watch an ad a day, which is crazy. And a lot of developers seem to think that adding ads is just it's going to increase churn, it's going to impact the user base, but studies show that it actually increases retention, increases IAP, increases ARPDAU if done correctly. So I think that really just understanding where to put it, especially with those safe spaces, is critical, because you'll just see an improvement in your performance, not a negative.
Yeah, it's amazing actually, because I think that as well, just from a player point of view, the games that use the in-app advertisements, for some reason feel like they're actually easier to get into as a player sometimes, because there's no actual financial barrier. It's the ads, and you can go into them if you want to, and they're in different areas, and often they're tied into sort of gacha mechanics and that reward basis. So yeah, definitely. Moving on though, unlike the premium model, other forms of monetization, such as these in-app ads, don't have an endpoint. Do you think that this is something that developers and monetization platforms need to be mindful of? For example, there's different models of monetization, but you could also use hybrid models, such as in-app ads and in-app purchases, or anything like that. But do you think the fact that this can go on forever is something that people need to be mindful of, either in a positive or a negative way?
I could try jump on that, but you guys will probably know more. For us, we're seeing more and more consumption of higher quality mid-core games, and a drop in consumption of commuter games. Commuter games.
Yeah.
And so what I think is that what people are seeing is that the commuter games aren't used as much, and therefore all the ads, people are just getting burned out by all the ads that people are seeing and just not playing them as much. So I think that frequency capping, in terms of just calming down with the ads, it's going to get to a point where too much ads are being shown, and just the users are just going to get sick of it. And I think that the big developers will be able to compete for a while, but smaller hyper casuals, I think, are going to struggle to compete, and building out more metagame to really compete. And yeah, I just think that's the kind of model we're going towards, that too many ads are being shown and it's gonna reach a breakpoint.
Yeah, I think the ratio is important, right? Like, I'm sure the appropriateness of the ad to the buyer is important. But, and this is very non-scientific. Whenever I make a habit of, especially for these more popular games, looking at all the comments, and especially all the negative comments on the stores. And nobody says, like, I wanted to see an ad for an RTS and instead I got shown an ad for like a house decorating game. The complaint, if it's there, is always there's too much ads. Right? There's too many, it's too frequent, they're too long, they don't let me play the game. Right? So I think like that ratio of your gameplay to ads, that's got to be very well thought out. Like maybe all you're trying to do is sell a premium version of the game, right? Because some games have that. They're like, you can get rid of all the ads for X amount. And that's fine, as long as that's what your intent is, to sort of give the players a demo and then annoy them until they pay up, because it's all kind of above board. But you've got to think very carefully about it, because like I said, Archero clearly has this great balance of like a lot of very intense activity followed by an ad which serves as a period of calm almost. So I think that's how they've got to think about it.
Yeah. Cyril, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's one, but I mean, the two things actually which are quite interesting to look at. So on the one hand, like going back to those commuter games, like hyper casual, name them, you can watch an infinite amount of ads, right? So it all boils down to pacing them the right way. So the user keeps being engaged, otherwise he will just turn his phone, like his device in test flight mode, right? So I think the tools we have today allow developers to do that by looking at the impression level data and so on. You can see the degradation of the CPM, for example, over time. And you'll see that the first couple impressions will be the one with the highest value, then there will be a big drop and so on. So it's not like hard maths to look at. So developers can basically understand that pretty easily and therefore adjust the frequency capping and everything. And on the other end of the spectrum, if we talk about like rewarded ads, actually there could be frustration from the user not being able to watch ads consecutively. So in some rewarded placement, you can just watch ads back to back. And if ads are not available, so you can get your reward to progress into the game, then you will get a user frustrated as well. So you need to be mindful of that for sure.
Yeah. And Jan, just to round this one off, this question.
Yeah, absolutely. To wrap it up, I think you can take it down to three things, or maybe two main things, which is the frequency capping and also the placement. It's worth keeping in mind that the positive reinforcement should be there if you are placing ads after a loss or a level quit. That means that you are not only creating a negative experience in the game, but also showing ads which create frustration. So try to put ads in a positive context as well. And the frequency capping is extremely important as well. You want to have some sort of control, so not just put the rewarded videos after every level, maybe make it behavioral, maybe make it based on the session length, session frequency, really look into the data, try to leverage that technology which is available to really provide the best user experience possible.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I was going to ask one other question, which was kind of, just like a wrap-up question. But I think before I do that, we've had an awful lot of questions come in through here. And I think some of them raise some interesting topics that, we might have touched on or we could have touched upon. So I'm going to jump into the questions before I, close out with the final sort of question. So first question here from Jackie is... what are your views on audio advertising in terms of offering frictionless monetization? And she also adds further down that, there's an article on PG Biz from Audio Mob showing the merits of uninterrupted gameplay and audio ads while gamers carry on playing. And, obviously that talks to the kind of things that Cael was talking about, reducing those barriers to monetization. So since I've got you as the main screen, Jan, what do you think about these audio advertisements that seem to be emerging now?
Funnily enough, I was reading the article earlier today as well. I mean, of course, it's interesting approach as well to the ad monetization. But it really comes down to the placement again. You don't really want to introduce an audio ad in a moment where there is an epic battle going on, or when a player loses his life again, which creates this frustration, and there's this music going on, and there's this ad going on in my head. You really want to make sure that the placements of those ads are appropriate, and also keeping in mind this positive reinforcement.
I can see it working well in a game like similar to GTA, right? Like if there's long rides anywhere. You're listening to audio anyway, you may as well listen to that. It would also kind of make sense in the context of the game. just like some digital banners have now popped up in games, it kind of makes sense in the context of games. All right, there's like advertising and there's banners in this game world, and it happens to be, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I thought it would work well in areas such as if you go into an in-game store or you go into a crafting area where you're not actively engaged in gameplay, but you're just sort of looking through, all the different upgrades you can have or anything like that. Having like as though it's a radio on in the background might work well. But yeah, Cyril or Cael, do you have anything to add on this sort of question?
I haven't read the article myself, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it all comes down to having a smooth integration, like you said. If it's just like blasting some radio spot during your gameplay, I think that can't work. It has to be basically thought about before and then so on. So the integration is as smooth as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And Cathal, is anything that you think?
Yeah, I understand we have a ton of questions. For me, I haven't seen it happen, or I haven't seen it myself. But I think that including that as an option, perhaps in the settings for certain users who want that to give maybe a multiplier or something, would actually be a way to let the users choose if they want to hear it. But yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. So one other question which comes up a few times, so I'll blend them all into one, is, and we'll start with you, Cael, is how has player perception and engagement to ads changed due to COVID-19? And then the other person is, has rewarded video engagement increased at this time?
Jeez. Tough question to get first. You could write a thesis on that.
Yeah.
No, but in general, I believe Unity are releasing a COVID impact report pretty soon, but in general, we're seeing that, as I mentioned before, there's a huge amount of new gamers coming onto the scene. There's no such thing as Saturday, Sunday, weekend kind of spikes anymore. It is dropping, but we're seeing session lengths increase. We're seeing eCPMs drop, CPIs drop. Just there's a huge amount of increase of users, and a lot of the algorithms don't actually know who these users are, or historically their data is very new. So it means that we don't actually know the like biggest impact or what's going to happen, because we're still understanding the data as well as it's coming, just like anyone else. But yeah, there's a few reports to come out, and if you want to reach out to me after, I have a big COVID impact report for you. Yeah,
it's fascinating. Cyril or any of the other panelists, do you have any insights from just personal experience of what you've been finding?
No, of course. So like Cael said, there's like readings for days. Sorry about this topic already. So I think every mediation or every network out there has dropped a report talking about that. So I think from what we've seen AppLovin as a network, and for the studios also, it's like just the mobile gaming industry overall has seen steady growth during that time, and basically users had more time on their plate. They become more engaged, and most likely the gaming sessions have become longer and longer. Yeah.
Yeah, and what about let's get to Jan before we come to Zaair. Do you guys from a dev point of view, have you noticed any changes at the moment?
I mean, yeah, working with different development studios, we also saw that basically in every of our projects, we've seen an increase in revenue in terms of the pure revenue as well. That comes down really to the amount of users we have. It's just increased, and that's pretty much the ratio of that is pretty much the same. What's more interesting is to look into these eCPMs and also into the general engagement of ads. I think users are more and more or less and less engaged with the ads, which is interesting to see. But at the same time, they also tolerate them. They also like ads, and a lot of users start expecting ads as a basis of the monetization in especially mobile games. So that's something which I think after COVID-19 will be worth keeping an eye on. And yeah.
Yeah. And Zaair?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just in general seen every indicator in the games industry go up during COVID-19, right? And because it was just the perfect storm, we can produce our product from home, the supply lines are digital, and everyone's stuck, right? So demand's gone through the roof. You had huge spikes in usage, new users, installs, even revenue across a lot of the studios that I spoke to. And as Cathal was saying, I think it's probably going down from that initial peak. But the important thing is a lot of people are playing games for the first time now, right? Because they were stuck inside with nothing to do. And I would guess that most people who become gamers don't stop being gamers, right? Eventually, once you've tried it once.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see this continue after the crisis. And as far as ads go, I think, as we've kind of like seem to have come to the conclusion to in this panel, ads, like well-placed ads, especially if they're optional and reward-based ads, are probably the easiest way to onboard new users onto any kind of monetization model. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of new users.
Yeah. So I'll stick with you, Zaair, and move on to one of the other questions. I know we're running out of time, but we'll try and fit one or two more in. Dan has asked, could you elaborate on how monetization is designed to stop the player from burning out on the game and losing interest? I mean, from your point of view, do you have any insight on this that you can share with Dan?
Yeah, I mean, we've created a CCG ourselves, so I'm more familiar with that. But that is an example of if you did not have monetization for getting card packs and for all of that, like we spoke about at the beginning, the player would burn through the content immediately and would get bored by week 2, right? As opposed to the months of doing that, of having that feeling of reward or of having collected something that not everyone has. So it's different for every game. That's part of it. I think if games like Archero didn't, and I just keep using that example because it's just well done, like video ads. I think if it didn't have ads, you would run through your sessions much quicker and get frustrated and stop playing, because the actual game can be pretty hard.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have just that peak intensity for 5 minutes, you're like, all right, like I'm just going to put this away for a while. And a while will probably become 4 hours. Right. Whereas with it's like you have 2 minutes of high intensity and then the ad drops the intensity for 30 seconds and then 2 minutes of high intensity. You could probably keep that up for 20, 30 minutes. So those are two examples. I think it's different across for every genre.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else on the panel have anything to add, or does that sum it up nicely?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, in general, the console and mobile and PC industries are so very different. And what happens is when content is on like your fingertips and it can be consumed so easy, people's attention span is just far lower. So what's happening is that people's concentration is limited. So when the session length is increased, actually retention and different KPIs actually reduce. You want to find a sweet spot of like 8 to 12 minutes, depending on the genre, of course. But like traditionally, if I hear like indie developers say, oh, I have an average session length of 25, 30 minutes, that's not actually a good thing, because you're burning out your players by so much by giving them constant enjoyment. They're just not going to come back. So like, I think the trick is that like you want to give them bursts of like quick, very entertaining rewards, but not often. So you want to limit the rewards and get them to come back at like the next day and the next day. And we see that happen all the time, where monetization is used as a implementation to slow people down. They can continue playing, but it'd be better if you played tomorrow. And that's how we can see that monetization actually reduces burnout and increases all the other KPIs there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else, or is that sort of sums up? Yeah.
I feel it's really, so to what was just said, it's really contingent to the game vertical we're talking about, right? So to your example, Cael, for example, for a game developer that would have like a 25-minute game session for hyper casual, that would be amazing. Like, but if a guy can make his money back within the first day, for example, because like there will be, I don't know, 10, 15 interstitial ads and so on consumed, then that's great and it's a win. For ads which are more rewarded driven and in-app purchase driven and so on, of course that starts to become an issue. So I think it's a very, very broad question, but super interesting, that would deserve much more time.
Yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't come to Jan, just in case you've got anything you wanted to add on this, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to add maybe one more thing, it's also about the regularity of the content as well. So if you are planning to add ads, it's very good to plan those sessions, you know, in planned intervals. So if you are introducing new content, do it every 3 months. The user knows when to expect the new content, and he will come back, he will watch those ads, he will pay for those in-game items. And that creates this regularity, this schedule, and the mindset of basically being engaged with the game for an extended period of time without being in the game every day.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's sort of a nice place to sum up. I was going to close it by asking, you know, with both business and pleasure minds, on what all the panel thinks is the best form of monetization to create a frictionless experience. But I think over the course of this, we've kind of come to the conclusion that right now that's sort of, obviously it's genre dependent, but for most it's about smart addition of in-app advertisement right now. Unless I'm wrong, I think that's kind of where we got to over the course of this. Of course, there's different things to explore there as well, such as battle passes. But yeah, thank you so much. I know we have got a range of other questions, but as always, we've got the Discord going that anyone can jump into and join in. But yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much to all of you, for staying with us all the way until the end and through the question and answers. It's been a long, but I think a fascinating panel that's offered a lot of, real use data for the people in the audience to use. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks very much for having us.
Much.
Appreciate it.
No, thank you to all of you for joining. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
See you, folks.
Bye. An absolute pleasure then. A lovely panel that I hope you all enjoyed as much as I enjoyed hosting it.